Inflation, the largest wealth transfer in human history. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Bobtheorc Show. Tonight's going to be a great night. We've got my dad with me to start out, and we're going to talk about inflation. But first, our disclaimer. This show is a work of fiction and is for entertainment purposes only. Any resemblance to real-world people and events is purely coincidental.
Amen,
yeah. All right. It was very nice of Richard to pre-record some intro music for us. So, well, here we are, Dad, just you and me. We're doing a little pre-recording. We're going to do tonight in 3 parts. And we're going to have our part 1, just you and me, where we're going to talk about inflation and a little bit of what people can do to prepare themselves. And then we'll have part 2 where we'll have all the guys and we'll just talk and maybe get a little bit more rowdy. And then part 3 we'll do the after party. But I wanted to start out with just you and me. And there's a chart from your new book. You rewrote your why don't you tell us
some background?
Yeah, give some background about the book.
Why would I be qualified? Why would I have any qualification whatsoever to talk about inflation? Why don't you give my qualifications?
Oh, you want me to say it? Okay, yeah, you're modest. You don't like to talk about it. So, Dad is a PhD economist. He was an economics professor at 6 universities all around the world, and he used to work for the Federal Reserve Bank as an economist. And when I was a little kid, Dad predicted that, someday in your mid-30s, the whole economy is going to go to hell. And you were very certain about it, and everything kind of followed along with your predictions. And I actually based most of my business life off of your predictions. It's one of the reasons I had my, got my own business. And I live well below my means, and I invest most of my earnings so that I can kind of beat inflation and be independent from all of the government overreach and economic BS that we often deal with. So what I'm going to do is Dad wrote a book in 1978, and he recently rewrote it, updated it for modern times, talking about how to beat inflation. And what I think I'm going to do is a chart at the beginning of your book. I'm going to pull it up on the screen about how $100 loses value over time. And they say that officially, inflation is 7% or so, 7 or 8%, the highest in history since the 80s. The reality is they changed the way that they calculate an inflation. If they were to calculate it the way that they originally did, and Dad, you can get into the details on that, they say that this would be the highest inflation that we've had since like World War II or something. And if inflation's at 7%, which is what they say, and if you look at the chart, your money will lose substantial value after 5 years. But if inflation's really at 20%, then your inflation's going to cause your money to start losing substantial value just after 2 years, and it's going to turn to essentially
in 2 years. Yeah, in 2 years you're down to 2/3 of your value, and in 3 years you're down to half of your value. So it's just absolutely corrosive.
And in 7 years it turns to confetti.
Yeah.
So and we'll be putting a link to this chart and a link to the book in the description below. And Dad's given out his book for free to help people kind of brace for what's coming. Maybe I should have called this episode "Brace for Impact," but maybe that'll be a good title for next time. So. In
fact, there's a delayed effect. Somebody takes certain actions, the government takes certain actions, and there's a delayed effect down the line where it's like a snowball going down a hill, getting bigger and bigger. So you don't see the immediate impact, but when government takes certain actions, you'll see down the line, if you know what you're looking for, what's going to happen, whether inflation gets worse or gets better. So take a big guess on what's going to happen now.
Well, so the premise that I see that I've been operating under is that I know that you have some people who call it the Great Reset based off of the World Economic Forum, Carl, whatever his name is, all that stuff. And I don't know if it's such a coordinated international cabal. Woo ha 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 ha. I think it's more that it's a buddy system. The government prints crap loads of money, lends it out to their friends, to the billionaire oligarchs and the big banks and all the, they lend it out to their buddies for next to nothing. These people then buy up large quantities of assets, and then because of inflation from all the money they printed, when they pay back the money, they're paying back with essentially worthless money, and they're getting it at practically zero interest anyway. Meanwhile, us poors get screwed. So that's sort of my general premise of what I've been observing. So, Dad, why don't you give us?
Yeah, why don't I hop in here? First of all, what is money?
Yeah,
The paper dollar that you hold up, and you go to the bank and they'll give you $100 bill, and it's just basically a piece of paper worth less than a penny. But because it's printed on it that it's worth $100, people accept it and use it for that. So the history of money is such that way, way, way back in primitive times, somebody might take a seashell and kind of round it out, grind it against a rock, and maybe drill a hole in it, make some other seashells, same way they'd have a beautiful necklace. And then somebody'd say, hey, I'll swap you, whatever it is, I just killed an animal and I'll swap you the animal meat for this necklace, or, maybe we'll strike a deal where you give me about half the beads in the necklace for this or that. And it sort of worked for money. And people basically did barter. And the problem is when you're bartering a goat for chickens, how many chickens for one goat, or maybe you only wanted one chicken? How do you just chop off part of the goat? Barter doesn't work very well in reality. And then down the line, they discovered that, hey, precious metals, silver and gold are pretty workable. And so they would take these in measurable amounts and stamp it with a die, and it would make a coin. And the problem is people would do what's called sweating the coin, sweating. They put a bunch of gold or silver coins in a bag and shake it up and down, and the loose edges would kind of chip off. And then they'd try and pass off the coins for the value. If a coin was a certain guaranteed weight with the Roman emperor's face stamped on it, if you'd have a worn one that didn't have much precious metal in it versus one that was newly minted, and people would try and pass off the less good one for the real one. In the meantime, they'd had all the metal shavings that they had purloined. And then what happened is the emperors, the kings, all the royalty found out that, hey, we'll use a special event, maybe a royal coronation or a new baby is born. We'll call in, we'll tell the people of the kingdom, you absolutely, under penalty of death, have to trade in your coins. And we're going to reissue it with a picture of the new royal baby on it. Of course, they'd bring in the coins, they'd melt them down, they'd add some cheap base metals to it, and then issue twice or three times or five times as many coins. Well, there was still only the same amount of things to purchase in their kingdom, so all of a sudden prices would go up accordingly. Not immediately, but eventually the prices would go double, triple, quadruple, quintuple, whatever. But in the meantime, the king would have money to fight a war or build a new castle or do whatever he wanted to do. And that's carried down to modern day. As they say, sort of jokingly, in the time of Julius Caesar, an ounce of gold would buy a fine Roman toga. And, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, you could go to Savile Row and an ounce of gold would buy you a fine men's suit. In fact, you could take the monetary equivalent of an ounce of gold today and go down to Saks Fifth Avenue and get a top-of-the-line men's suit. So an ounce of gold pretty much held its value. Now, what's happened is we've decoupled our money from precious metals, enabling the government to print as much or little as they want. And not much of money anymore is in the actual physical printed form. It's electronic entries that we consider to be money. And the only reason it's usable is we're just used to using it. So other things such as cryptocurrencies come along, and those are considered by some people to be possible monies as well. Money has two capabilities. One is as a store of value. So if somebody works hard, saves part of their income, and it's a store of value. And the other use is to make purchases, so for transactional value. And the government feels very threatened in that, things like cryptocurrencies or gold, silver, and so forth tends to nudge in on this, and they, of course, don't want people.
Wasn't there a time that the U.S. government, required everybody to turn in their gold?
That was the thing. So at that point, gold was something like $20 or $26 an ounce, and then immediately after it went to about $35 an ounce, and of course today gold is very nearly $2,000 an ounce. So that's clearly a warning that if you do exactly what the government says, the government will come out well on the deal and you won't. So it's a real dilemma. One, in my view, as an economist, America has been very prosperous for these several hundred years because we set up certain things in our Bill of Rights and our Constitution. And even though we have a flawed sort of reality, it's pretty well worked. The people have had the freedom to go out and work hard and keep at least 1% of what they make. Um, Under slavery, the idea is that you do the work, somebody else collects most of the proceeds and just gives you enough to kind of manage to survive on. And governments love to sort of try and be tyrannical and enslave people. Well, in America, we've pretty well survived up to this point. But as the government's gotten, particularly the federal government, as it's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, uh, prior to World War I, the federal government wasn't very big. Washington, D.C. was a sleepy little town. They didn't have air conditioning, and not many people wanted to live there, and federal government was almost nothing. And by now, the government takes an enormous tax on everybody. In fact, I think the discussion is that something like only half the people, of adult age pay income tax. That means about half the people don't. And another thing I've come across is that people, about half the people are working, and the other half just, they're just not producing anything. So you got an increasing amount of people that are basically being pulled. The number I wanted to come up with is about half of those people who are working and paying income tax. Half of them are producing things, working in car factories or, working in shops or service industries or whatever. But the other half, in one way or another, work for the government. They're bureaucrats, they're in the military, they're in the police, they're fire department. So basically, about a quarter of the working age population is actually producing anything. So it's amazing we have as much prosperity as we do have. Now, in the age I was growing up, I was born in the early 1940s. I grew up in the 1950s and 60s. In a family, in those days, that was considered normal to get married and have kids. And one person in a family could work, and the other person could stay home and raise the kids. And one job, wasn't a lavish scale of living, but you could have a car and you could have a house, and you could consider buying a house or live reasonably comfortably. And now, in a given family, providing two people get married, you're lucky. You might be working 3 jobs between 2 people, and you have latchkey kids that come home from school and come home to an empty house without somebody caring for them. So, if anything, our standard of living has dropped in the meantime. And one thing I wanted to go into was, as a child in the 1950s, I could buy a candy bar, Milky Way, Snickers, Baby Ruth, Hershey's, for 5 cents. 5 cents. Now, what does a candy bar cost now? It must be at least 20 times as high. But, 5 cents. And I'd go to summer camp at Scout Camp, and the Coca-Cola machine would be mechanically operated, have electricity keeping the Coca-Cola bottles cold, but you'd put in 5 cents. You'd turn a mechanical lever, and a bottle of Coca-Cola would roll out. What does a bottle of Coca-Cola cost? So it's shocking how much price inflation has occurred, and it chips away a little bit every year. You don't really feel it.
I've got a receipt.
Go ahead.
I've got an image I'm going to pull up on the screen, and let's see if I can pull this up here. So I've got some receipts. This is an excerpt from your book, one of the images I put in your book, from when Granddad, your father, had some went to some hotels, and you've got
It was his honeymoon, late 1930s.
Right, so you've got a hotel in Tulsa, Oklahoma, for $3 a night and 20 cents for phone calls, because calls weren't free then. You've got a hotel in New Orleans for $4 a night. You've got a hotel in New York City for $5 a night with $1 in parking, and you can't do that anymore. The last time I stayed in a hotel, a cheap hotel, cost me $50 a night, and in New York.
You're talking in mainstream America.
Yeah, and in New York, you're looking at $150 to $250 a night for a cheap hotel.
So it's a lot more than the $5. And try parking a car for $1 for 24 hours. So clearly it's a problem. The question is, what do you do about it? Oh, and the house I grew up in, my parents, right before World War II, paid something like $2,500 or $3,000 for it. And I'm sure the token value of the house right now would be 30 times as high. Now, what's interesting is that house is an asset, needs to be maintained. Periodically, the roof needs to be replaced, the water heater, all the different things. So you have sort of a wasting asset you have to keep maintaining. But real estate historically has been something that pretty much keeps up with inflation. The problem is the government taxes it every year. So the question is, do you own the house or does the government own it and just collect taxes on you? And in the meantime, most people trying to buy a house, the bank owns more of the house than they do. And by the time they pay the house off, they may have paid twice or three times the actual dollar value price of the house. So it's a tough deal for the ordinary person in America. And of course, our concept is Americans, we're free people. You know, the government is supposed to be responsible to us instead of us to the government. But when people are in power, what's the saying? Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And once they get some power, they kind of forget the fact that they're supposed to be subservient to the people and they want to reverse it.
So I've got two topics I want to bring up. The first topic is regarding capitalism. Ostensibly we're a capitalist economy, although the reality is that there's essentially a partnership between big government and big business, which some people call it crony capitalism, other people call it less desirable names. I seem to recall a certain political and economic ideology of the 1930s involving the partnership of big government and big business.
That's right. Where you mass kill millions of people, but we won't.
Right. We won't talk. This is the
theoretical.
YouTube. This is the YouTube friendly version, so we won't say certain words because obviously our government would never. Would never go in that direction, and never partner, with big business and maybe kill millions of people in foreign wars for no good reason. But how does the first question is, how does the partnership between big government and big business end up affecting the little guy? One result of all the COVID stuff is that you've seen all the small businesses shut down while the big businesses got to stay open. And this resulted in a tremendous transfer of wealth from the middle class to the rich. What's your take on that, and what can be done as individuals, as people?
They say during the American Revolution, where we were rebelling against authoritarianism from that royalty of Great Britain, maybe only 10-15% of the population was actually fighting the war. And I think we're in a similar situation now where the bulk of the people are just sort of clueless. There's a word that combines the word sheep and the word people. And instead of sheep and people, they're called sheeple. And sheep just kind of chew the grass and go to the slaughter. But thankfully, there are a few people that are the guard dogs that are watching the sheep and trying to protect them. And of course, the authoritarians do all they can to, these guard dogs are bad, 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 and so on. Depending if you have enough guard dogs and if they're, doing their thing as best they can, it looks like they might keep things restrained. My take on things is, I started to say, as I was growing up in the 1950s, 60s, if a person finished high school, not even a college degree, but finished high school, you had people working in Detroit at auto factories, making enough money, they could send their kids to college, the spouse could stay at home and raise the kids. They had a surprisingly high standard of living. And now you've got families where everybody in the family is working, and you can't even think about college without an enormous amount of debt that's going to cripple you the rest of your life. So it's become a real problem. My sense is, if we didn't have so much government and so much government transfer of wealth, our standard of living could easily be double or triple what it is right now. America's not a bad place to live, and it has more capitalism and more freedom than a lot of places, sort of. But I happen to be in New York City, where you were born. I still live here. And I go out and I see trash overflowing from the trash bins. I see homeless people scattered all along the sidewalks. I see empty storefronts. That the policies of over-intrusive government have not helped the economy one bit. And yet you're out in Oklahoma, where people say, basically, leave me alone, I'm free. And I think in many ways the standard of living is higher.
There's a reason that when COVID happened, I decided to hunker down out here, where I've got a small business, and all my consulting work in New York City evaporated. I don't earn any money from New York City at this point. But and as much as I love New York City, many of my friends feel trapped there because they can't do anything, they can't get out. They're just economically bound, and with all the various mandates and regulations, and crime in many cases. It's not so bad in Manhattan, but if you live in the boroughs, some of it's pretty rough.
Well, actually, they're empty storefronts. In the 40 plus years I've lived here, never before all this have I seen literally like two and three storefronts in a row. And I'm talking along Broadway in Manhattan, where you see empty stores uh, just like
So in
crazy.
Manhattan, it's
And
gotten
they've
that
been
bad.
empty. Oh, yeah. And they've been empty, literally through the whole, well, maybe within 6 months of the start of the shutdowns and the virus mandates and this and that. And there's just no sign of much of anything coming back. We have
And
a new mayor and we're hoping he'll come back on things, but I think he may be passable on crime, but I don't know if he has a lot of clue on anything else.
yeah, there was a recent John Hopkins study that I won't reference until later. I'll do that in the next segment, which will be a Rumble only segment. That talks about the effectiveness of the shutdowns and all that stuff. But we'll talk about that not on YouTube, because YouTube would get very upset if I talked about this certain John Hopkins study that came out. But from my sense, I managed to do okay because I owned my own business, and I was in a long time ago. There was a guy named Bill Landau who had the notoriety of having escaped Auschwitz 3 times, and the Nazis didn't kill him because he had essential skills. And when I was a little kid, and he was very old. He showed me his tattoo, and he said that if you know how to do something that's necessary, no matter how bad the world gets, you'll be okay. And this is why I got into computers, because he told me that he thought computers would be necessary. And lo and behold, when everything was getting shut down, you had all these problems. My computer business was what survived through the pandemic. We were considered essential. Not that I would have shut down anyway, because I'm here in Oklahoma. But he was right in that my computer abilities were essential regardless of the rest of the economy. And so many of my friends lost their jobs and lost
Well, you
their
have friends. You
livelihoods.
have friends in New York City that
I had to
the one
one
fellow
of
that
my
was a
friends.
teacher.
I had to mail him food at one point. I FedExed him canned goods because he was essentially trapped. He couldn't. He worked at a private school. It was shut down. Yeah, no, he was screwed. And so
Well,
my
let's shift gears to some of the things that ordinary people can do to try and survive. And again, I emphasize I'm not trying to sell a book to make any money because we're giving it away for free at this point. But there's going to be a link on your website at the bottom where they can go and they can download the book and read it.
yeah.
But some of the basic things, if you're an ordinary middle class American who's kind of being squished in the middle, and let me give an example. When I was a kid, too small to realize what was going on, another little child showed me if you took two flat rocks and you could put a worm or a bug between those two flat rocks and kind of mush the rocks together, it'd either squish out green or squish out red. And the middle class person in America is more or less like that bug that's just getting squished between top and bottom. At the very bottom, we've got all sorts of welfare, provided you don't work and provided you vote for the right political party. And at the top, you got people doing super well because everything's structured for them. But the guys that are actually, well, we have truck drivers in Canada that are having a tough go right now. And we're told that they're terrible people. And yet, as near as I can tell, they're ordinary people. Um, anyway, what does the ordinary person do? And let's say inflation's ramping up and a declared rate of inflation is up towards 7 or 8%. But let's say the real rate of inflation is more like 15 or 20%, at least on the real things. You try to go out and find a place to live. Forget about even trying to buy a house. You might be a college graduate. You probably have an overhang of college debt of 100,000 or more. Um, you're lucky to rent. And if you try to rent, the prices just keep going up. You're really, really being squeezed. Um, so you basically, and one of the things covered in the book is budgeting. What's a budget? Budget is you look at how much money you expect to have coming in and how much money you expect to have going out. And you look at the categories of money going out and say, where can I cut some corners? And you try to cut down on non-essentials. You don't necessarily have to go and spend a fortune on a latte at Starbucks. You don't have to have a lot of travel and
Well,
luxuries.
and the secret's to do that before you get in trouble. So, like, one of the reasons that I've always been okay is that I live vastly below my means. I could afford to eat out every night if I wanted to, but I cook in, I eat in almost all the time. I don't go out to the theater anymore. I pretty much, we all thought that this would happen a little bit sooner, but I've braced for impact a long time ago, and so my expenses are next to nothing. I think I live off of like $1,000 a month, maybe less than that.
Well, you own,
Uh,
you're buying your own home, and you
right,
started
right.
buying it years ago. But
But what I'm saying is that if you can make, by the time you're short on money, it's too late to cut back because you're already going to be in debt. So you've got to do it, and you have to anticipate that you're going to have financial problems in the future and start cutting back beforehand. I think.
I think I showed you the cartoon. It's not in the book, but a couple of men are out. They're in a suburban area, and they're standing out in front of their homes, and it shows a repair truck there. And the one man's talking to the other, and said, "This was the month I was going to try and get ahead on things." And then the water heater went, and the furnace went, and this and that, and the plumbing, and
I
they're
think I
always
see the cartoon.
unexpected.
I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go pull this cartoon up for everybody. So, yeah, you'd sent me this. You'd sent me this cartoon. Only yesterday, I said this looks like the month I'll get to lay a little money aside, and this is what, from 1975, from the Register and Tribune Syndicate. So this is from the last time we had big inflation.
In
So
fact, the story was I was writing my book. I was an economist at the Federal Reserve Bank at that time, and evenings I'd come home and I was frustrated that government agencies and the Fed weren't really solving the problem. And so I'd work evenings until late hours writing on this book. And by the time it was just about finished, I went to some publishers. They said, "Wow, this would have been a great book to have a couple of years earlier, but it's too late now. Inflation's crazy high at this point. There's not a whole lot people can do." I think we're still early in the game on this. And in fact, this is about like chapter 17 of the book, where it's called stagflation. It's stagnation of the economy, with the economy turning down, people, more and more unemployment, production going down. In the meantime, prices are going up. So we got the worst of all possible worlds. We got inflation and stagnation both at the same time. Anyway, presuming you barely have your head above water, at least one nostril above water, what do? You cut back your standard of living in any ways that you can. There are things that you can buy, and one thing is just to buy, you know, constant pleasures. Go to the movies, go to the theater, travel. You have meals, things where there's nothing to show for it after the fact. And then you have consumer goods that you can, you buy and they pretty much disappear. Aside from food, but they're things you use up and they're just gone within a year or two. You can buy fad type clothing and fad type items and all these gizmos you can buy on Amazon.com. But again, it's pretty much gone. And then you have what's called durable consumer goods.
if I could
Your
interrupt real quick,
what?
I've got a friend. One of my friends is homeless. He's down on his luck, and he's been trying to save up to go get his own place. He's just couch surfing among different friends. He's always eating out. He's always buying random electronic gadgets and all kinds of crap he doesn't need. Of course, he doesn't have any money, and he works a crappy job. He's making like $10 an hour, but he's just not getting ahead because he's every penny he brings in, he's buying cigarettes, he's buying soda, he's buying he's just always buying all this crap that he consumes, and so he's not able to set anything aside. And I don't bother trying to correct him. I've told him what I thought years ago, and he's been like this for a long time, but he's never going to get ahead because he keeps buying these short-term pleasures. Anyway,
So
go on. I just
anyway,
want to toss that
we're,
in.
we're talking about how you can spend your money. Now, there are longer term durable items like a car, a house, home appliances, things of this nature. And these, if you choose wisely, it doesn't have to be a fancy car. You do your research, you try and get one that has a good repair record and things like that. And these aren't too bad to spend your money on. And you want to go for the best quality you can, something that's going to last you a long time, be well suited to your needs. And then finally, there's a category that would be investment items. Whether it's a 1 ounce gold coin or, some real estate, if you've got enough money to put together for a down payment on real estate, your own house. Uh, Handling investment real estate where you have renters can be tricky. The renter gets in there, doesn't pay the rent. Depending on local laws, it might be awfully hard to deal with them, get them back out of the real estate. In fact, you want to do careful research and do credit reports on them before you rent to anybody. But of all these categories, the one you don't waste your money on, like you say, eating meals out, going to Starbucks, entertainment, travel. These things are gone instantly, and the better way to go is more of an item that's going to last. And on that, you want to go for high quality. You want to go for lasting styles, things that aren't going to change, not some fad style. Interestingly, in the 1960s, men's trousers, if you bought a suit or, trousers, they had these very, very narrow, what they call pegged legs. It just came down as tight on the lower leg as possible. And then, the styles went back to more normal, and you'd see the James Bond movies, and the guys, he looked handsome in a suit. And now they were back to, if you bought a suit, the legs are just super narrow again. So you want a lasting style, having it go down tight on your calf and the wrinkle behind your knee when you bend your knee to sit down is not a lasting style. It's hard when almost everything is in a fad-oriented sort of way. Another thing you can do is try to learn to bargain. If you go into a store, you look for probably a store where you can deal with the manager in charge or the owner of the store, and you maybe can get a cash discount. Maybe there's a small flaw in the item. It's not important to what you're using it for, but you can try and negotiate a little bit and get a better deal on it, trying to get a discount. You want to spend your time searching out and researching. Interestingly, if I'm going to buy something on the internet, say on Amazon, I pull up the reviews, and I don't start with the 5-star reviews. I start with the 1-star reviews. 1 star being as low as the reviews will go. And somebody says, it broke as soon as I had it for a week, or it has these flaws and isn't very usable. You start reading the 1-star reviews, then you work your way up to the 2-star reviews.
I usually,
go ahead.
If I could interrupt, a lot of times I'll look at the 2 to 4-star reviews, and the reason is that most 5-star reviews are fake because companies will pay, to have people just generate fake reviews, or they'll pay to generate 1-star reviews for their competitors. And so I know that with you get a lot of legitimate 5-star reviews as well, but if you see a company with 20,000 5-star reviews, it might be a little bit fishy. Or if you see somebody with a whole bunch of 1-star reviews, that could be artificial also. So you want to read the text of the review and make sure it's not looking like somebody from Romania just typed it up real quick.
That you can look at the wording, and if the wording's sort of strange, that'll be a point as well. As you're shopping, you want to compare quality. A lot of people that aren't very wise will just go for the cheapest price regardless. But the value is, if it'll last longer, if it's more suited to your needs, if the cost of operations would be lower, the functionality and so forth. You want to look at a lot of different aspects. You don't look only at price. And sometimes the upper end people pay a lot of money thinking if you pay more, it's better. Not necessarily. But you want to consider all the different, again, doing your research on the internet, and there are sites you can look at that are evaluations where they test out products. One trick when you're shopping is to shop and leave your credit cards and most of your cash at home. And if it's necessary for you to go back and come back the next day to buy something, you think about it overnight, that's going to force you not to make the same impulse purchase as you might otherwise. And sometimes you can buy used, particularly on a durable item like a car. The person that buys it new, absorbs a lot of loss. Maybe buying it a year, 2 or 3 years old, if it's well maintained, you get a better value, for your money on it. Shopping less often would be a factor. Instead of shopping frequently, just try not to tempt yourself if you can manage that. And then if you do reach the point of retirement, one possibility is to work later in your life. The amount of money it would take to retire at age 55 or 60 is a lot more money than if you retire in another decade or 2 decades hence. And I found in my case, being active and working as I'm older, it not only helps cover expenses and you don't need a lot of retirement money, but it keeps you fit and active. Around New York City, I typically walk 2 or 3 miles a day. I purposely don't take the subway or bus, and I just get all the walking I can. And walking is a terrific exercise to keep you healthy. So, and keeping your mind active as well. So it's very nourishing just to stay active rather than retire and stare at a wall sitting on a couch. And another possibility is when you reach retirement, you might move from a high cost of living area, say San Francisco or Los Angeles or New York, and look for something in the South or the Southwest where cost of living would be lower.
Well, and
Let's see.
you also want to look for areas that are maybe underdeveloped, because that'll be an opportunity in the future.
Hmm.
My The biggest thought for young people, and I get a lot of people asking me this all the time, is where do they, if people are so poor that they can barely survive, they're basically going to get screwed. But there's a lot of people who are, who are working class, who are getting a little bit ahead right now. They're in the trades and whatnot, and they're trying to figure out where to park their money. And I
Hmm.
remember you would always talk to me about investment tangibles, and I know that over the years I've always parked most of my money in investment tangibles, and that way I'm relatively resilient against inflation. I buy a bunch of laptops, and if prices go up, I can still sell the laptops for more, and I'm covered. For example.
We'll give the example. You bought 35 laptops of a similar size and type that you could swap parts between them. You knew they were good to work on. Uh, you put in, you know, they were spinning drives, and you could put in a flash drive. What was it, a school or somebody that had those?
Yeah, it was well. What had happened was there was a school auction, and so I bought these laptops, and we sell them as refurbished. We fix them up and we'll refurbish them, sell them at the store for not that much. But as inflation is hitting, and as my costs on electronic components has gone up about 30% this year, which that's a lot more than the 7% inflation they're telling us it is. But worst comes to worst, I can just sell them for 30% more because it costs me more, and I can pass that cost along. If I didn't own my own business in a necessary field, I'd be screwed. One of the things that I tell a lot of people is you've got to find a field where people need what you do, and it's also hard for the government to screw with you. And so, because technology, if you look at what our average age of our politicians is, somewhere between Civil War and dinosaur. I mean, they're old. Um, there's a lot of our politicians make you look young, and so they don't know a damn thing about technology. That's probably why all the big tech companies can get away with all the bullshit they do. But technology is relatively unregulated. Or I know these two guys. They were in college and they graduated from college. They were just mowing lawns. They mowed a crap load of lawns. They just expanded a lawn care business, and they live in a very nice house now. Each of them has a really nice house just because they did lawn care. People need their lawns mowed, and they were willing to work hard. There are these roofers that I knew, and I'm not sure about their legal status. Only one of them spoke English, but I was told that the foreman is the guy that speaks English, even though it was a different older guy that didn't speak English was giving all the orders. And they were telling me that they were bringing home about $10,000 a month doing roofing.
Hmm.
So there's opportunities to do your own thing and make a lot of money, but you've got to be able to park it someplace. And so why don't you tell me a little bit? Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about investment tangibles, and then we'll probably wrap up this segment and then bring all the guys in and have a more public segment.
I don't have the chapter of my book right in front of me, but oh, and again, I encourage people to go to the actual book and their topic headings as you look through all these. Um, but I go into great detail on real estate because that's something that's worked over the last 50 or 100 years, maybe more than that. The toughie is the government can come in and keep raising taxes and come in and hassle you on it and so forth. Um, and I tell the chapter in the book how to do your research. You want an area that's not declining. You, if there are certain transportation things, if they're building a new highway interchange, all of a sudden the land around there is going to jump in value. So transportation times are
Well,
something to consider.
if I remember
Go ahead.
correctly, you were using real estate as an example for the kind of detail you need to look into before you invest in something, and then find something that an individual should invest in what they're an expert in, and do that
Or
level
certainly
of
they're very passionate about,
right.
your great uncle Bill collected antiques and he was very skilled at it. And he got, you know, music boxes and china and crystal and this and that. And I'm sure by today's prices, whatever he paid was a fraction. You know, things like that got passed down to his heirs. But he was passionate about all this, and a rosewood table, small end table, and all. His home was beautifully decorated with these things. He could enjoy and savor the beauty of these things on an everyday basis, and these were investment tangibles in the way of antiques. But with antiques, of course, you have to be very careful, and often you go to an antique show, and there might be a hidden flaw that the layperson wouldn't be aware of. So anything you're buying in an investment tangible, um, antiques, gold, silver, all these things, stamps. There tends to be what people do is overgrade something. You go in and you want to buy a coin. They take a coin that's got a certain amount of wear and they tell you it's in much better condition than it is and it's worth a lot more money. You turn around to sell it, and again they lean the other direction and say, "Oh, this, you can see where the face of the coin is worn down and it's worth less value." There's a big bid-ask differential on whether it's antiques,
Well,
coins, or anything else.
what I do a lot of my investment in technology, obviously, because that's where I'm an expert. And what I find is you get a lot of people who will come to me with broken computers, and they don't want to pay to have them fixed because they already bought something new, and they just want to sell it cheap and get a little bit of money. And if you make the money on the purchase, not the sale. I think Warren Buffett said that. And if I get a good value, if somebody's wanting to sell something that I can fix up, and they're wanting to sell it at a real good price, then I can buy it, I can fix it up and value add with my labor. But of course, you have to be careful with electronics because they depreciate so quickly. So if I don't turn around and sell a laptop within a year or two, it's going to lose most of its value. But
But
I've
you
always
remember being at Uncle Bill's home, some of those
oh
beautiful
yeah.
antique.
So I've been focusing.
Uh,
I've been focusing more on portable assets because I love real estate. I'm an architect by training, among other things, but I've been through so much hassle with my house in the city that if I were to move, I can't take my house with me. I'd have to sell it, and so I don't. Uh,
and if you need an odd $50, you can't sell a chunk of your house.
right, exactly. So I've been, I think crypto might be a good way. For a lot of people are doing crypto stocks and whatnot. I don't think bonds don't give a good return anymore, although they're safe supposedly. I think the stock market's overinflated.
Well, and whether it's
Um,
stocks or cryptocurrencies, there's a wide volatility. Prices go up and down sharply, so you have to brace yourself for that.
but I'll
And even
often
with, go ahead.
I'll often invest in my own projects. I find that if I buy and invest, even if I buy a crypto and it goes up, 15-20%, whereas if I invest in a project, I can double or triple my money by investing into something that I have direct control over. Uh,
It's a better deal for you.
yeah,
Yeah.
but I think people
Um,
just have to find what they're good at.
One thing I find that very, 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 very few people look at the fine print. And you may or may not recall, but back in the day when we lived in New York City and we wanted to go to somewhere, visit, you know, like there'd be other families at your school that would invite us to go 50 miles out of the city and go to their country home. And your mom and I would go to rent a car. And I'd be there. In those days, things weren't very electronic. They'd hand me a contract and they'd have light, light gray background with slightly darker gray print and itty bitty size. And I would step off to the side of the counter and I'd read the fine print. And not many people would read the fine print on a contract.
Yeah.
Of course, anymore, these things electronically, you'll have a 15-page agreement for Apple Computer that do you agree, and they'll have you click a second time. I'm sure out of 10,000 people, not a single person ever bothers to read it
Yeah.
because it's just too detailed.
Well, and they're not
But
easily enforceable either. The user agreements are not easily enforceable
yeah,
at this point.
but nonetheless, in doing your research, you go into a supermarket, and food is very addictive, or sugar is very addictive, uh, and they find that they're adding it to everything. I noticed in Morton salt, if you look on a Morton salt container, it has sugar in it. Now, why in the world would you buy sugar that has salt in, or salt that has sugar in it? And so they put, you want to read the fine print. You want to read the ingredients. And on breakfast cereal box, new, improved, vitamin enriched. Well, the vitamins that they enrich it with are chemically produced vitamins that aren't very healthy for you sometimes. and you read all the fine print, and you have to list the ingredients in terms of quantity. So they'll list the sugars as two or three, dextrose and maltodextrin and sucrose and natural cane such and such sugar, honey. By the time you put all those sugars, that's the top 40 or 50% of the product. But they bury it so that the first thing is water, and then you get potato starch, which is another just slightly more complex form of sugar, and on down the thing. Which brings me to something called shrinkflation, shrinkflation. What happens is they put less and less product in a given container, or they shrink the containers trying to make them look as big as, like a Coke bottle is a classic example with that dipped-in waste on the bottle and the tall neck on the bottle. If that were kind of a little spherical sort of bottle or a little square bottle,
It holds a lot more.
it'd be a lot smaller. Yeah, it'd hold a lot more and be a lot smaller. Or in packaging, you on a breakfast cereal box, sometimes it'll say, contents may not be filled up due to mechanical packaging. Well, if you can get a man on the moon, you can fill a package all the way with product, but the packaging, is big and the product's only up about 2/3 the way to the top of the box. So you have to watch for all these little subtleties. People talk about going out in the jungle and out in the wilderness and survival skills, but we have an urban jungle where you have to really use your intellect and your brain to deal with this. And unfortunately, our schools have fallen down in the years since you and your brother went to school, or even when I went to school. They would teach the basic skills of reading and writing, mathematics, and so forth. And now people just, by the time you've done all the sports events and all the other things, a surprising number of people get through what's called high school and can't even read or write, which is a real shame.
Or at least certainly not read or write at a mature level.
No, not a reasonable level. And you really have to do research on anything you do, whether buying a product or selecting your politician. And politicians are very good at making you promises and then just doing the exact reverse and enriching themselves.
Well, regarding politics, I found that your local politicians affect things the most. One of the reasons I chose to stay in Oklahoma is because I'm in a relatively small city. I know the city. I know some of the city council and the mayor, and I'm more established here. I'm a bigger fish in a small pond, and because it's a smaller environment, we're more insulated from all the national policies. And if you're directly involved in your local politics, in your local government, that has a much bigger effect on what you're doing. Look at, most of the reason why New York City is trash right now is because of the local policies. The federal government's not helping, but most
you
of
have
these
the
local
same
policies,
federal government in Oklahoma as you have in New York City or San Francisco,
and we're doing vastly better here.
Yeah, so you have a complete difference, and you have one political party that's been in charge of certain areas for a long, long time, and these are the areas with high crime. They talk about compassion for poor people, but the poor people suffer the crime and all the problems. Let's shift to one other area.
Okay.
We talked about investment tangibles, how to protect yourself, and so forth. But what are the actual causes of inflation, and how do you know whether inflation rate is going to go up or come down? And there are two main causes of inflation. One is issuing more and more money, and it can be electronic form or it can be in physical form, but more and more these days it's electronic money. And the second cause of inflation is people have very good causes. Oh, we have to save this particular bug or worm or fish or whatever, or we've got to protect the environment, and we don't want global warming, and we don't want this, and we don't want that. And they impose so many regulations that shrinks the output. So price inflation is when you've got more and more money relative to the amount of goods and services to be produced. So one side of the coin is issuing more and more money. So if the government comes out with a big stimulus plan or big spending or Build Back Better, that down the line there's going to be a rolling effect that gets bigger and bigger in months, 6 months, a year, 18 months down the line. In the same fashion, they say, hey, we shouldn't have fracking, and we shouldn't have drilling on public lands, and we've got to close down pipelines, and we've got to fire nobody without the coronavirus vaccine can have a job, and all of a sudden you're shrinking the output, so you have less and less goods and services to be purchased. So you look at the government policies. Are they tightening up on the supply of things to be produced and generating more and more money. And again, it's a snowballing effect that's going to take 6 to 18 months down the line. So the policies being pursued right now are the ones we're going to see the result down the line in 6 to 18 months. And let's say if there were political change and somebody comes along and says, look, I'm going to wipe away a lot of unnecessary regulations and limitations, and productivity will go up, and we're going to start, having less and less excess money. Then again, 6 to 18 months down the line, things might start doing better. But if things look like they're getting worse, that's the time that you go in and you say, I really don't want to pay a big premium. You go in, you see a beautiful antique table or music box or something, and you know you're going to pay a certain price for it. And if you turned around immediately and sold it, you'd take a big loss. You might lose 50 or 70% of what you pay for it. But if price inflation is going to destroy your money supply, during the last great inflation, during the Jimmy Carter era, people were buying anything and everything. The mason jars that with people in rural areas will can, they go out to their orchard and they'll can some peaches or something. They boil them and they put them in, they pour some wax in and they screw the lid on and so forth. They were mason jars. People were collecting mason jars. On telephone poles, you have these glass insulators that would keep the wires from touching the metal of the supporting pole. There's a pin that sticks up. People were buying all these wacky, crazy things that had no particular value. Anything tangible, they were just going nuts on trying to buy these things. So if inflation's ramping up, it gets to the point where everything gets wacky expensive.
Well, there's a chart or graph from your book. I'm going to go pull that onto the screen, where it. I wonder if I can zoom.
Is that the buying and selling, when to buy, when to sell?
Yeah, I'm going to zoom it in a little bit, and so I'm going to describe the chart here. Where?
Well, why don't you explain that? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the blue line is the rate of inflation. It's not the value of something; it's the rate of inflation. And then, and what you want to do is you want to buy before inflation is going up. If you can find when inflation is going to be going up, that's when you buy, and then you sell.
Before it gets worse.
Yeah, before it gets worse, then you sell when the rate of inflation is going to be going down, because you want to keep your, because at that point your money is more useful liquid. And then there's also, during recessions, there's also often good buying opportunities, because people, especially towards the end of a recession, when the because recessions will tend to push down inflation.
That's less being produced.
Right.
People are unemployed.
Right. Yeah. Recession is a contraction of the economy, and often inflation will go down during a recession. Although this go round we might have recessionary inflation, or your shrinkflation, stagflation, where you have the economy receding while inflation's going up. But a lot of times you have good buying opportunities in a recession, and if you can time the buying opportunities for when people are selling stuff cheap, because they need the money because of the bad economy, and you can also combine that with when you think the inflation rate's going to go up, then you can find some good purchase opportunities. And then when you need the money at the start of a recession to help give you some stability, then you have something that you could sell before other people realize that the economy is going to tank.
Now, another notable thing on that graph is you have a hilltop where it goes up, it stops going up at a rate, and then it starts leveling off, and then the price action starts going down, and it goes faster and faster and faster.
Bring the graph up again. Yeah.
So you've got a sell point, when you have a hilltop and you're coming over the top of the hill, and the bottom you have a saucer where it hits a valley and it levels off and then starts coming back up. It's not 100% certain, but that's one indication is you look for bottoms or saucers, and you look for hilltops, and that
and if you try to, one of the things that you told me is if you always wait to try and find the absolute bottom, you either miss your opportunity or you'll buy too soon and the price will drop further. Mm-hmm. And so it's best to be a little bit cautious and wait till it's a solid upward trend.
And by the way, we're not giving financial advice. We're talking theory, just the general theory behind it.
This is just general theory.
Now, I don't think you pulled it up yet, but I love that graphic where it shows small businesses and then that big building back behind with the government compliance department. Is that anything you could pull up? There's a lot of truth in that.
Let me see if I can find the
And beneath the cartoon, it says dealing with government is often more difficult than dealing with customers.
Well, that was something I just added for the book itself. But here's the
I know.
original here's the original graphic that my friend
Drew up for the book.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I will say this. Running a small business, I've structured my business largely to avoid all the government bullshit, but dealing with all the government paperwork is a huge time sink, and a
Well,
lot
for
of
a small business, you don't have a team of accountants like General Motors would have.
yeah,
So for a small business, it's hard.
and a lot of times it's easier to pay. It's like there's I think there's some sort of a tax I'm going to have to pay. A business property tax that I'll have to pay. I have to pay it about the first of the year, and I'm
Is that
probably
a new tax?
no, it's something that I've had to pay. So I don't even understand what it is, but they want to bill me for my furniture in my computer store, and it's usually like $50 a year or something like that. It's just a trivial amount of money.
You don't have much furniture in a
And
computer store.
well, especially because I hand built most of it, so it's not worth anything according to the government. And so I haven't had time to make it down there, and so I might end up having to pay like a $5 penalty. But I don't care because my time's worth more. And if I end up paying even a $10 penalty because I'm late, it's a civil penalty, not a criminal penalty. So fuck it. I'll pay the extra $10 and. When I have the
Well, in
time
the
to
meantime,
go to the
government
courthouse.
regulations are so overwhelming that there's just no sane way that any reasonable person can deal with this. You just do the best you can.
Right.
You have your own small
Well,
business.
and that's why I chose a business industry that has very low regulation. If I were dealing with, I'd often wanted to go into construction because, I have an architecture degree and I really love building things. But there's so much bullshit involved in construction that I don't know if that would be
Yeah.
viable. This is why most of
You look at a single family home and all the constraints and the materials and all the regulations. What would you say half or a third of the cost of a home would be government constraints?
I don't know, and a lot of it's the labor cost, and because I largely built my own home, so I saved a lot on that. But I know that if you're in construction, there's all kinds of insurance and city, very city building permits and stuff like that. So I couldn't tell you exactly what all the costs are. I know that the construction guys who are making money, I know this one guy who only works cash under the table, and he's doing okay, and he mostly works for rich people who they'll just pay him cash under the table. He doesn't pull permits. He doesn't worry about any of the licensing or insurance, and he does a lot of very detailed work for these $1 million homes. And it's all just cash under the table, and they don't bother pulling the, they don't bother doing the regulations.
Which we have to point out is not the right way to
right.
do it.
Obviously,
Everybody
don't
should
do
pay all
it.
their
It's
taxes.
just that, why do you think you have all the illegals doing construction work? Because rich people don't want to pay the full price for all the regulations and all the,
Mm-hmm.
It's most markets have their loopholes, and what I find is that as long as you're not threatening the ruling class, they really don't care what you're doing. I like to joke the only reason Bernie Madoff went to jail is because he was stealing from other rich people. If he'd been stealing from the poor, he'd probably be sitting pretty on Wall Street right now.
Do we want to pull up the graphic where you have the two pallets of lumber?
I'll pull this up, and then we'll probably.
I think
We'll
we're
probably
about
just
covered.
about wrap it up. Is this the right one? Here we go. So here we have essentially 2 pallets of wood. What, $1,000 before inflation and $1,000 after inflation. If you've done any home repair recently, or just any any do-it-yourself projects, or if you work in the construction industry, lumber and just building materials have gone through the roof. It's insane. So, well, I'll tell you what. Let's wrap it up and take a break, and then we'll probably come back with a second segment where we'll bring all the guys in, and the second segment will focus on more of a practical, how do you specifically deal with a lot of the inflation issues. What can individual people do? And we'll get into more detail about people's situations. and we might make that a Rumble only broadcast. But I wanted to thank everyone for watching, and please like and share the this video. Check us out on
And feel
YouTube
free
and
to
Rumble.
click on the book. Click
Yeah,
on the
check
book
out
at
the
bottom.
book. Yeah, we'll have the book at the bottom,
That's
and
great.
I'll see you for the next segment here in a little bit.